All right, Shalom. I want to start off by giving our praise, honor, and glory. Dutia Hawa, Bahashim, Yahweh Shai, Bahashim, Rakakwadash. I'd like to give double honors unto the apostles and the elders of Great Millstone, who I learned this truth from. And I'd like to say peace and salutations unto the hopefully elect. And today is Monday, January 26, 2026, Missile Monday. And I have this article from the Times of Israel, and it says China's top general accused of leaking nuclear weapons secrets to U.S. report. So I'm going to go into this article and bring out a few scriptures. Lord willing, this lesson is edifying and straight to the point. And as you can see, that's the gook right there, the general. It says the Chinese military's top general is reportedly being investigated for leaking information about Beijing's nuclear weapons program amid a long-running purge of military officials by the country's leader. China's defense ministry announced on Saturday that Zhang Yujia, if that's how you pronounce his last name, 75, the senior of the two vice chairs of the powerful Central Military Commission, was being investigated for suspected serious violations of discipline and law, but did not provide details. But people familiar with a briefing attended that morning by top Chinese officers told the Wall Street Journal on Sunday that Yujia has been accused of sharing key technical information on China's nuclear weapons with Washington. Further details were not shared at the briefing, the sources said. He is being investigated for alleged efforts to build his own circles of influence within the Communist Party's top military decision-making body, the Central Military Commission, sowing division in the organization, according to the sources. Gu Jun, the former general manager of China National Nuclear Corp, the state-owned company that runs China's nuclear programs, provided some of the evidence against the top general. People familiar with the briefing said. Gu is also under investigation for offenses against the Communist Party. A spokesman at the Chinese embassy in Washington told the journal that the investigation shows that the party's leadership has a full coverage, zero tolerance approach to combating corruption. Neither Zhang or Gu could be reached for a comment by the journal. Analysis believe the purges are designed both to reform the military and to ensure loyalty to Chinese leader Xi Jinping, who also chairs the military commission. They are a part of a broader anti-corruption drive that has punished more than 200,000 officials since Xi came to power in 2012. Another member of the commission, Liu Zhenli, has also been placed under investigation by China's ruling Communist Party. A defense ministry statement said Liu is the chief of staff of the commission's Joint Staff Department. The commission is the top military body in China. Zhang joined the People's Liberation Army in 1968 and is a general from its ground forces. The Communist Party expelled the other vice chair of the commission, He Weidong, last October and replaced him with commission member Zhang Xingmin. In 2024, the party expelled two former defense ministers over corruption charges. The Trump administration released a new national defense strategy on Friday, acknowledging China as a military power that it said needs to be deterred from dominating the U.S. or its allies. This does not require regime change or some other it's like an existential struggle, the strategy said, rather a decent peace on terms favorable to Americans, but that China can also accept and live under as possible. So, as you can see, one of China's leaders is, up under investigation, pretty much, treason, because if this is true, then, he's pretty much giving information to, the U.S., Washington in particular, about China's nuclear program. And even if this is true, they're not going to be able to stop those missiles from coming over here, man, So it doesn't matter, if this guy is leaking that information and trying to, sow discord, among them. But either way it goes, the U.S. is not going to be able to stop whatever, nuclear weapons China has in stock, So, hey, this is good, Just goes to show you, man, we're getting closer to that war. And even then, like, you have things like this, happening. And I wouldn't be surprised if, you have U.S. officials or generals, leaking information about, the U.S.'s nuclear program. But, that's just speculation. I'm not saying it's fact, but I wouldn't be surprised if it was happening or has happened anyway. So, just going to grab a couple scriptures, man, but, it's wartime, man. It's wartime. And a lot of people don't understand that this is a very, very serious war that we're coming into. And this is literally going to be the war to end all wars, man. So there's nothing that, Babylon is going to be able to do to try to stop this from happening, So I'll start with Malachi chapter 4 and verse 1. And it says, "For behold, the day cometh that shall burn as an oven, and all the proud, yea, and all that do wickedly shall be stubble, and the day that cometh shall burn them up, saith the Lord of hosts, that it shall leave them neither root nor branch." And right, that day that is coming, that shall burn as an oven, is talking about, the day of the Lord, World War III, because this is that great and dreadful day that is spoken of in the scriptures. Ultimately, the return of our Lord Yahushua, that's really the great and dreadful day. But, it goes hand in hand, with World War III, because while this war is going on, our Lord is going to come back in the midst of it, But we know, or should know, that, this war isn't going to take place until the prophecy of Revelation chapter 13, verses 16 to 18 take place, which is, the mass implementation of the mark of the beast, which is the RFID microchip, So until they make that device mandatory, this war isn't going to take place. But what you still see these different nations gearing up for it. This is why they're upping, their nuclear arsenal. This is why they are getting their, militaries ready, for that day, So then I'll come back to the book of Isaiah chapter 9 and verse 5. And it says, "For every battle of the warrior is with confused noise and garments rolled in blood, but this shall be with burning and fuel of fire." And right, man, this is going to be how traditional warfare was fought. As I always make mention, you will have ground troops that are going to be going to war with each other, But this war is primarily going to be fought with, these nuclear weapons, man, these missiles, you know. That's primarily how World War III is going to be fought. That's that, you know, the bow of steel that is spoken of in Job chapter 20, which, I'll actually grab, because that's one thing the elites want to do is fulfill their New World Order, but they won't be able to, you know. So this is the book of Job chapter 20, and I'll start at verse 22, and it says, in the fullness of his sufficiency, he shall be in straits, in a position of difficulty. Every hand of the wicked shall come upon him, meaning that the other nations are going to seek to put hands on Esau, man, because they're, pursuing to Revelation, the 17th chapter. The nations are mad, man. Everybody's mad at America, Babylon. Everybody is mad at this place. And everyone that possesses these nuclear weapons are going to come up against her, Verse 23, it says, when he is about to fill his belly, Yahweh shall cast the fury of his wrath upon him, and shall rain it upon him while he is eating. And right, man, it's talking about, the elites wanting to fulfill their New World Order, which the Lord is going to allow them to only get so far before he takes them out, and how is he going to do it? Verse 24, and this is the point, verse 24 and 25, and it says, he shall flee from the iron weapon, and the bow of steel shall strike him through. It says, it is drawn, and cometh out of the body, yea, the glittering sword cometh out of his gall, terrors are upon him. And right, man, that's describing these missiles, that's that iron weapon, that's that bow of steel, man, is described as being glittering sword. Why? Because again, that jettison pack that is going to be guiding these missiles to their, particular target, man. You're going to see it. It's going to be bright, just like, you see a glittering sword, in the sunlight. That's, symbolic to the missiles, man, because again, they're going to give off that light, man. They're going to be extremely bright, because they're going to be on fire from traveling extremely fast as well, So I'll get the book of Joel chapter 2, and it start at verse 1. It says, blow ye the trumpet in Zion, and sound an alarm in my holy mountain. Let all the inhabitants of the land tremble, for the day of the Lord cometh, for it is nigh at hand. And right, man, the day of the Lord, it is, man. It's probably closer than we believe, but again, we still have to wait for these last couple prophecies, to come to pass before we can see the destruction of Babylon take place. Verse 2, it says, a day of darkness and of gloominess, a day of clouds and of thick darkness, as the morning spread upon the mountains, a great people and a strong. There hath not been ever the like, neither shall be any more after it, even to the years of many generations. Talking about the missiles, man, because this is why there's so many of them, on the earth today. Primarily the main two nuclear armed nations are Russia and America, which both countries possess over 5,000 missiles, but Russia has more than America, But all of these nukes that are on the earth today are going to be used. None of them will be spared. In verse 4, it says, Salakia. In verse 3, it says, a fire devoureth before them, and behind them a flame burneth. The land is as the Garden of Eden before them, and behind them a desolate wilderness. Yea, and nothing shall escape them. And right, man, that fire again that's, devouring before them is talking about, the warheads in particular being on fire because they're going to be traveling extremely fast. These nukes are going to be launched into outer space, they're going to leave the ozone layer, get their specific trajectory, and return to Earth, on fire because again, they're going to be traveling at Mach speeds, So they're going to be on fire, returning to earth, thus they're going to be glowing, just like it describes in the scriptures, the stars shall fall from heaven, which I just read in, the book of Matthew, earlier. It says the stars shall fall from heaven. That's what it's talking about, man. The missiles, raining upon Babylon, you know. And it says, the flame that burneth behind them, again, the jettison pack that is going to be, guiding these missiles to their targets. All right, it says what? The land is as the Garden of Eden, meaning, there's still parts of America, where the landscape is beautiful. And again, one example I always like to use just here in the state of Michigan alone, the land is beautiful. Parts of Michigan, is very, very beautiful. You wouldn't even think you two were, in Michigan or in America at all. But what it says behind them a desolate wilderness. So once these nukes detonate, man, it's going to completely destroy this place, turning it into a desert after a while anyway, because it's going to take a while for, that fire to die down, And it says nothing shall escape them, man. So the only ones that are going to be able to escape this destruction is the elect of the nation of Israel, man. The 144,000 and a 1/3 men, women, and children. They're going to be the only ones to escape. And how are they going to escape? By the chariots, being beamed up right before, these nukes touch down, And, the verses below are just giving the description of how they're going to look, But I'm going to jump to verse 8 because this is, one of the main points I want to make. Verse 7, Genesis book of Joel 2:7, it says, they shall run like mighty men, they shall climb the wall like men of war, and they shall march every one on his ways, and they shall not break their ranks. So these different missiles aren't going to hit each other, in the air. They're going to be launched in a particular fashion, and they're not going to break their ranks, as it says, man. One isn't going to pass another. Whatever particular order they're launched in, that's, the particular order. Verse 8, it says, neither shall one thrust another. They shall walk every one on his path, and when they fall upon the sword, they shall not be wounded. And again, one missile is going to bump into another one, and detonate in the air, or, these defense systems, because that word sword in verse 8, goes into missile, and let's just prove that real quick, and as you can see, Strong's H7973 Schlock, and it says wood weapon missile, this is what it's talking about, so it doesn't matter that, the U.S. is going to have their defense system, the Golden Dome or whatever, defense systems, Trump has in place, it's all going to fail. Nothing is going to be able to stop them, these nukes from touching down, So I'm going to end it with this. This is the book of Revelation, chapter 9 and verse 15. It says, and the 4 angels were loosed, which were prepared for an hour and a day and a month and a year for to slay the third part of men. And right, when you go and read Revelation, the 7th chapter, it mentions, the 4 angels, which these are 4 literal angels holding back the 4 winds, which the 4 winds represent, the coming destruction that is going to take place on the planet Earth, because there is a set time when this destruction is going to take place, when this war is going to take place, and it's for a particular group of people. That's why it says for it to slay the third part of men, because you have three classes of men on the earth. You have the sons of God, which are, today the biblical Israelites, you so-called Negroes, Latinos, Native and Seminole Indians. You have the sons of men, which are the different heathen nations. And then you have the sons of the wicked, which is the so-called white men or white, race. That's what this destruction is for. Edom, the wicked, and you will have 2/3 of the nation of Israel that are going to get caught up in his destruction, for their wickedness, for not turning back to the Lord, and that's going to be their punishment, to be destroyed with the wicked. And then, you heathens, you different heathen nations that, are over here and aren't able to escape the destruction. You're just collateral damage. You're just over here to make a little money and die. So, you don't really matter. But that's it for this one. Lord willing, this lesson was edifying. I want to give all praise, honor, and glory due to Yahweh, Bahashem, Yahweh Shai, Bahashem, Rakakwadash. I'd like to give double honors unto the apostles and the elders of Great Millstone, who I learned this truth from. And I'd like to say peace and salutations unto the hopefully elect. Till next time I say, Shalom.